The company's focused on cultivation, production, and distribution of a broad range of therapeutic solutions targeting two of the largest medical cannabis markets in the world, Canada and California. I will now turn it over to CEO Dr. Anthony Holler.
Thank you very much. And this works out. Oh, great. Our first slide is a disclaimer slide. As you know, there are risks and certain things that forward-looking statements we make. I am not going to read this whole thing as it instructs me to read. Oh. Sunniva means gift from the sun. And obviously, you can imagine that we do our growing with a greenhouse, and we'll talk about that. We're in a new industry, and our mantra is, in every aspect of this industry, better is possible. If we quickly look at our share capital and all those things, boring stuff, we're listed on the Canadian Stock Exchange, and as people probably know, we have to be listed on the Canadian Stock Exchange because we have US assets. We're also listed on the OTC. Our range in price is around that $5.25 to $6 range. Market capitalization is about 130 million US. Common shares outstanding, 32 million. Options and compensation options, 4.5 million. Warrants, 2 million. And we have a convertible debenture that translates into about 2.3 million shares. Fully diluted, we're 40 million, 800,000 shares. We are currently just finishing a financing for just over $20 million, and that financing will close tomorrow, and about 3.8 million shares will be issued along with some warrants. I talked about better as possible. Our vision really comes from my past history to a certain extent, in that I was the CEO of a biopharmaceutical company that was in the vaccine business. I was the founder and CEO. That company was able to produce, using modern technology, vaccines at half the cost of other vaccine manufacturers around the world, and consistently higher quality. In addition, we had scale in the sense that we could produce 100 million doses of this flu vaccine. That really translated into one of the largest companies in our sector, GlaxoSmithKline, coming in and paying us about $2 billion in total compensation. We are a low-cost, high-quality, scalable company. We believe that you have to start with growing, whether it's in Canada or here in California. Clean product is becoming imperative because of regulation and also because the product has to be tested. We're focused on what we call good manufacturing practices, which is the standard that all medical products have to go through. Think of this as producing pharmaceutical-grade cannabis products. Our focus is really on all product lines. So flower, pre-rolls, extractable products. We own a vaporization company that makes custom vaporizers, and we're looking at the beverage industry as well, because we do believe the beverage industry is going to be a big part of the future. And this is a rapidly moving industry, so it's critically important that we get our products out in the marketplace and we focus on better as possible. Just some highlights for us. I talked about our greenhouses. These are state-of-the-art, purpose-built GMP greenhouses with a large capacity, 172,500 kilograms annually between Canada and California. Cathedral City, where you can actually go to Cathedral City and see this facility. It's not fully operational yet, but you'll see the facility. 489,000 square feet. We're on phase one, which is about 365,000 square feet, capable of producing about 50,000 kilograms of product a year. In Okanagan Falls, which is in British Columbia, We're building a 759,000 square foot facility with total capacity of about 100,000 kilograms, total capacity a year. Again, our focus in this industry has to be on being a low-cost producer and having the highest quality. At the end of the day, this business is going to not be any different than other businesses. It's all going to be about your cost of production, the quality of the product, and the scalability. These greenhouses are designed so that you harvest every day. So from a, let's say, a dispensary standpoint, these products will be available every day to their consumer. It won't be available every 4 months. In Canada, Canada's a bit different than California in that we have a true medical system where medical patients can access cannabis via doctor's prescription, and then the licensed producer can directly send the cannabis to the patient. What that gives you really, though, is a very high margin product. We estimate that costs from our production facilities will be approximately $1 a gram. In Canada, medical cannabis sells for about $8.50 a gram. So there's a pretty big margin there. Now, the other part in Canada I should mention is that the recreational adult use market is coming on stream, but it's a wholesale market. You will have to go through a provincial a provincial authority who will buy the cannabis, and then it'll be distributed by that provincial health authority. So it's a wholesale market. So the retail market is the medical market, the wholesale market is the adult use market. We acquired a company that has 7 specialty clinics that focus on cannabis as a medication. Of the 400,000 patients who are registered today, we've registered 100,000 of them. Now, we're currently not in production in Canada, but we're sending those patients to other licensed producers. And eventually, obviously, when we're in production, some of those patients will come to us and we'll continue to build this large patient base. There's been a number of estimates in Canada, about 2 to 2.5 million patients are potential true medical patients, along with the fact that insurers in Canada are starting to cover that, and you can actually write off medical cannabis if you have a prescription from a physician from your income tax. So it's being very much treated like a medicine. We also signed in Canada an agreement with Canopy, which is the largest cannabis company in the world. Under that agreement, we supply them with 45,000 kilograms of product for a 2-year period. In California, our strategy really is we've got the growing, we have an extraction facility where we do volatile and non-volatile, and we're developing products there right now. The next step for us is to tackle distribution, and we also believe that retail is a huge opportunity in California. We expect that in the first quarter of 2019, we'll launch a comprehensive group of products. And again, I'll mention flower, pre-rolls, extractable products, vaporizers, and obviously those vaporizers will be filled by our product. We have a number of key milestones, and I'm not going to exhaustively go through this list, but obviously we've been able to finance this company adequately. We broke ground on our Canadian facility, and currently that facility has got all the footings and foundations on, as well as we have about, I can't remember how many containers on their way from Holland to Canada for the superstructure. In July, our Sun Oil extraction facility went into production. I think more interesting for you are the launch of our brands in California. And we expect that Q4, early Q1, we expect to launch a number of brands in California. In Q1, we expect our first harvest out of our facility at Cathedral City. And in Q3, we expect our first harvest out of our Canadian facility. We have a very experienced management team from all areas. I mentioned my background. Leith Pedersen, who's sitting here beside me, can give his own background.
I guess I can. My background's 20 plus years investment banking, corporate finance, true entrepreneur, working with some of the big boys based out of a boutique firm in Calgary, Alberta. Learned a lot, and more importantly, learned what not to do. When we first started looking at this industry about 4.5 years ago, the first guy that came to mind, not only from his entrepreneur success, but his energy, was Tony Holler and his respect for Canada. So he was an easy fit, and with him came along some of the key members that built ID Biomedical, which was a great success story from the flu vaccine industry. So being able to grab that first, build a business plan around that, and I think we're finally at the stage now where 8 months ago, this was a dream. Let's build these big things. Let's try and finance them. And I think we're finally at that stage now where we're actually producing stuff in the very near term. And, as Tony alluded to, that first mover advantage in California, especially from a clean product basis, being able to scale then up your brands from there, which I think is going to be the lifeline of brands in California, is having the ability to scale and get onto the shelf space. And lastly, going after those last two verticals, which are distribution. Tony will talk to. We have a distribution license. We also have an on-site flagship dispensary that really will be like no other in the world. Everyone calls our facility the spaceship, but I look at it more as like a winery. You go to that experience, you see where your wine is made. Well, that will be the same experience that you get when we open up our dispensary, and you're going to have that feeling that you have a trust of where that product's made. You can look into the facility, and I think leveraging that and that feeling and the feeling of what Sunniva is and Gift from the Sun, and expanding that retail footprint throughout California is our next leg, and we're truly aggressively looking for those additional doors. But pass it to you, Tony.
Thanks, Leith. The people we have in our management team all have experience. Most of them have come from other industries where they've proven themselves. And you can see some pretty famous names on here like Lululemon, Kudo, and companies like that. This is where our executives come from. In terms of our board of directors, obviously there's Leith and myself. Ian Webb's an independent director. He was a partner at BLG, one of the largest law firms in Canada, and he actually served on a number of boards with me. I always say that Ian Webb is the guy who keeps me out of jail from a public market standpoint. Norm Mayer is an independent director, ex-partner of KPMG. Dan Vass, who's a director, runs Natural Health Services, the clinic group I talked about. Todd Patrick has worked with me at ID Biomedical, a number of other companies. Michael Barker you might be familiar with, because Michael Barker is the CEO of Barker Pacific Group, which is a California real estate development group. And Barker Pacific financed our California facility. And Michael sits on our board as well as being a major shareholder of this company. The other person you might be familiar with is Luke Stanton. He's obviously an attorney and a founder of the Frontera Law Group, one of the leading legal groups in terms of the cannabis industry. If we look at the market opportunities, the populations of California and Canada are quite similar. We talk about the number of medical patients. Obviously, the market is huge for this product, both on a medical and on a recreational adult use basis. In Canada, we're a few years ahead in terms of licensed producers and compliance. And I think in California that you will quickly catch up to having, right now there's not a lot of compliant producers, but that's going to quickly catch up. The recreational legalization market opens, it's today, isn't it? Or is it tomorrow? October 17th, recreational cannabis becomes legal in Canada. Now, they've got all sorts of issues with actually getting people cannabis, but that market is going to be legalized on October 17th, and obviously in California at January 1. So if we look at vertical integration, and here we're specifically speaking about our strategy. There are some companies, as you know, who focused on retail operations, and now they're moving downstream. We started out with cultivation because we saw so many issues with cultivation, whether it was in Canada or here in California. So we start out with cultivation, and obviously our two facilities, one in Canada, one in Cathedral City, and those are big scale manufacturing facilities. Then we moved up to extraction, and we have both volatile and non-volatile licenses, and we'll have exactly the same in our Canadian facility. And we also want to become a house of brands. We already have a brand in Vapor Connoisseur. Vapor Connoisseur provides custom pens and cartridges for a large number of branded companies. Next area, which is very important to us, because remember, we're producing a lot of cannabis each year. So that means we have to sell a large quantity of cannabis per year. So we're now looking at licensed distribution, and obviously the other area is branded stores. In Canada, remember I mentioned earlier on that distribution is a different animal. It's direct for medical distribution, it's direct from the licensed producer to the patient. And then for recreational adult use, it's through a provincial health authority. And in Canada, the interesting thing is that the big companies like Canopy and Aurora are developing houses of brands. And it's interesting, our agreement with Canopy is that we develop a whole house of brands under the Sunniva brand for Canopy because they want to cover a whole range of brands. It's a bit like the alcohol industry where you have these big companies and they come into, let's say, a liquor store and they have 300 brands. And so for the liquor store or the government agency in Canada, they can deal with one party and have a huge breadth of brands. So we decided early on that we needed to partner with one of these big players in Canada because they're going to dominate the shelf space in Canada, very much like 3 liquor companies control 93% of the shelf space in the liquor business in Canada. And I know in the States you have big liquor distributors who do exactly the same thing. What are the strategic pillars here in California? We talk about a purpose-built, large-scale, state-of-the-art GMP designed greenhouse, ensuring not only supply, remember we harvest every day, but remember that we control, think of this facility like a facility, an indoor facility that's powered by the sun. And so obviously that helps in your costs and other things. And the other thing people sometimes forget is that plants evolve for millions of years to use sunlight to grow. And so, you hear the argument that plants do better under this light or that light. And anybody who you talk to who's a biologist or that will say, yeah, that's a bit suspect to me, given that these plants evolved to use sunlight. So this greenhouse facility is one of our pillars. The sun oil extraction facility is our next pillar. Then we talk about the house of brands, compliant distribution, and branded retail expansion. When we look at this facility, and I mentioned the size, but the total facility will be 486,000 square feet with 256,000 square feet of canopy. Production capability, 72,500 kilograms per year. at peak production. Remember, with these big facilities, you don't plant the whole facility at once. So it'll take approximately 9 months for us to get to full production. I mentioned phase 1, which was about 50,000 kilograms of flower per year, and phase 2, which is about 22,500 kilograms of flower per year. We expect costs to be less than $1 per gram. This is pharmaceutical grade cannabis. We don't use pesticides or anything else in the facility. One of the things that we've done in preparation for planting this facility is we have a licensed facility here in Oakland that's growing our mother plants, doing the genetics, making sure the genetics are clean, all the things you do before you move that plant into our facility. Obviously, we need to have clean plants in that facility. At our facility, we have a large retail space. It was one of the licenses we got as part of the growing licenses. So we have, I think, 18 growing licenses. We have dispensary licenses, a distribution license, and obviously we have licenses for our extraction facility. This is if you go to Cathedral City, I think it's a must-see. The dispensary itself will showcase our brands. When you walk into the dispensary, you'll be able to actually see where we plant, the plants themselves, how they're taken care of. You won't actually be able to go into the actual growing facility, but there'll be a viewing room where you can view the facility. Obviously, this will be our flagship retail store, and we expect to grow our retail presence with this store. About a mile from our Cathedral City site, we have our extraction facility. When we actually got our licenses, the Cathedral City wouldn't allow extraction facilities in the growing facility. So about a mile away, we set up our extraction. And we have the capability of doing about 500 pounds per day of biomass. It's licensed for both volatile and non-volatile extraction. And we currently are producing oils, distillates, concentrates, fresh frozen products, capsules, sprays, tinctures, and obviously the next thing that we're looking at is beverages. We've secured a 12-month contract with several leading California brands, and we're developing proprietary formulations designed for our own in-house brands. I mentioned our retail space. This is a high-end retail location. Think of it like an Apple store or a store of that nature. Viewing windows. We do have a delivery license for the local area, and I mentioned that our plan is to expand our retail presence in California. When we talk about house of brands, obviously we want to develop both medical, recreational, and specialty brands. We don't want to limit that to just that. So we may acquire some brands, especially brands that we're already working with, and specialty products. And when we look at all these products in each of these SKUs, you're really talking about what I spoke about already, which is flour, pre-rolls, concentrates, extracts, beverages, vape cartridges, vaporizers. Just some quick discussion of brands. There are a number of brands that we're developing currently. From our perspective, the most important thing about these brands, obviously the pictures are going to be pretty of these brands, but it's the quality and consistency of the product. We all buy all sorts of items, and quite often we go to the same manufacturer for a shirt, a dress, a car. Why do we do that? We do that because the product is quality and it's consistent, and you know what you're getting, you know how long it'll last, all those sorts of things. Similarly with cannabis, that's going to be an important factor. We know that in Canada we've seen where somebody buys cannabis, whether it's dry flower or something else, and they really like it. When they go back to the dispensary, they get the same product and they go, gosh, the experience is completely different. And in part, those things happen because the growing environment in the grow facility is not consistent. It changes all the time, and plants are like everything. If you change the conditions, certain genes inside the plants are turned on or off, and so you get a different plant in many ways. So from our perspective, the most important thing that we can do is not only make sure these products are pesticide free and free of heavy metals, all those sorts of things, but also make the customer experience consistent every time they use the product. And that's how I think any brand in any industry gains loyalty from their customers, is because that customer experience is similar all the time. So in terms of the strategic pillars of Sunniva in Canada, they're pretty similar. In fact, we talked about the differences, but this is a large greenhouse, 759,000 square feet. Again, it's everything inside that greenhouse is controlled. It's a completely closed environment. So it's like doing an indoor grow, except you're in a greenhouse. It's pesticide free. We talk about reproducible Sunniva branded cannabis products, and that gets back to the customer experience. That customer experience has to be reproducible. On-site will be an extraction facility. We talked about how in Canada the branding is important to us, but that we're actually working through one of the big companies, Canopy, who has a house of brands and is offering that right across Canada. I think it's very difficult for a company to work on their own in Canada because you have these dominant players. And so I think it makes sense to work with them. And the nice thing about Canopy is they're actually supporting our Sunniva brand and encouraging us to have a whole suite of products that they can sell as part of their house of brands. I mentioned, of course, the medical side of things, which is a very, very attractive market. And for us in Canada, we look at the medical market as being critically important for us. And it's because you direct contact with the patients, and the other thing is the margins are much better. I talked about our clinics, and I should quickly just talk about our clinics a little, because they are true medical clinics where a doctor sees you, you have nurses, you have educators. So in Canada, you have to get a prescription from a physician in order to get cannabis for medical uses. So a doctor sees you, then there's a suggestion of what type of product you should use. Then you go to an education center, which is part of that facility. Someone walks you through the products, how to use the products. There's a recommendation made. Let's say that Canopy, Freya, and another company offer the type of product that the doctor's recommending, then the education is focused on those companies. But the patient at the end of the day makes the decision about what product they should have. Once the patient makes that decision, then we have software that automatically sends all the information to the licensed producer the patient has chosen. So we're the first company that's the clinic company that simplified the whole process of registering patients under the Canadian Health Canada laws. We currently, I think actually this number is a bit out of date, but we have over 100,000 patients registered. And I mentioned that we're the biggest supplier of true medical patients to the licensed producers in Canada. Obviously, once we're a licensed producer, some of those patients will come to us. We will keep an agnostic approach to which licensed producers patients choose. This is just a pictorial of the facility. This facility isn't built yet, just so everybody knows. The concrete is in the ground, and the next step is the infrastructure. It's being built in 2 phases, and both phases are roughly equal. At the center of the building is a header house where we manufacture. I mentioned the size. 100,000 kilograms of dry product production at peak capacity annually. Phase 1 is 458,000 square feet. Phase 2 is another 300,000 square feet. Although the greenhouses are a similar size, we are building the header house with phase 1. We received our confirmation of readiness under Health Canada's rules. And basically, think of this confirmation of readiness as being, if you do what you say you're going to do, you're going to get licensed. So it's the big hurdle in Canada in terms of allowing you to go forward and build. Basically, Health Canada is saying, if you build it, we've inspected all this sort of stuff, we've checked out all the people you work with to make sure they're not criminals, et cetera, go ahead and build it. We talked about our market to medical patients being direct from the licensed producer to the patient, and we talked about the canopy supply agreement. One of the things that I'll just quickly mention is the funding for this facility. We've funded the building of this facility to the tune of $15–20 million to date. And we currently are looking at alternatives, including debt financing from banks, to fund part of the rest of that. So the one question we hope to answer for everyone in the near future is how we're actually going to fund this facility. In terms of supplying Sunniva branded products, think of this way. There's about roughly 400,000 patients registered now. There's 2 to 2.5 million patients who would be eligible for medical cannabis. So there is a significant growth area for medical patients. And we would like to capture a significant portion of those medical patients for a number of reasons. First of all, we're set up with our medical clinics to capture these patients. And we believe, because of the sort of medical cannabis laws and how it's being treated in Canada, that this is going to be a big opportunity for us. So a certain amount of our production in Canada will be targeted towards medical patients. We're currently talking about 25%, but that could grow over time quite significantly. Insurance companies in Canada are starting to cover cannabis. The big corporations like Loblaws, which is a massive grocery chain, pharmacy chain in Canada, covers all their employees for cannabis. We're just seeing Sun Life, a big insurance company, is also doing the same. So in Canada, we're seeing a move to insuring medicinal cannabis if you have a doctor's prescription. So we obviously want to take part of, be a large part of that trend, because we can sell directly to the patients. One of the advantages we have in Canada is we've learned a lot of lessons from building our facility here in California. And so when we look at building our Canadian facility, we've changed a few things in terms of how we build. The one thing I probably didn't mention is these facilities are highly automated. So you have robotics that move tables. And so in fact, one of the ways to reduce costs, we talked about using the energy of the sun, but the other way to reduce costs in the production is to automate these facilities. And we have an automation company in the Netherlands that are providing all the automation technology for us. And if you, very much like California, track and trace from seed to sale is going to be an important component of doing business there. Natural Health Services, we talked about the fact that we had 7 patient-centric clinics and education centers across 4 provinces. And we're really leveraging experienced physicians who are interested in the medicinal benefits of cannabis, and that, I think, is going to increase with legalization. I think physicians in Canada have been a bit hesitant to be involved in prescribing medical cannabis just because of the perceived illegality of it. So as we move further along, especially after October 17th, I think you're going to see more and more physicians prescribing cannabis. And we have some very elegant solutions for individual physicians who want to prescribe out of their own office, including our software package, which makes it really easy to register a patient. The other thing that's happening in Canada is that the big pharmacy chains are getting involved in the medicinal cannabis industry. And again, we can provide almost a one-step solution for these pharmacy chains. So quick summary. I think we've got a very experienced management team who's done this before in different industries. Large-scale, purpose-built, best-in-class facilities. I think in California, we're the only facility of its type in terms of scale and technology being built currently. Our cultivation capacity is large, 172,500 kilograms per year in combining Canada and the US. We have a very significant supply agreement with Canopy Growth, the largest cannabis company in the world. Our distribution in Canada and the medical distribution of the product is very attractive for us because of this direct-to-patient sale. In the near term, down here in California, what you're going to hear from us is the launch of Sunniva branded products. And we expect that to be late in the fourth quarter, early in the first quarter of 2019. And the other thing look for is vertical integration. We're moving quickly towards solving distribution and also retail. I think that's it. So, I'm sure a number of questions have arisen. How I'd look at it is Sunniva will be the house of the brands, and then there'll be a number of brands underneath that. They won't be called Sunniva, right? There'll be a number of, and what we're doing is we're targeting, a number of different market segments in that brand. But the one thing we have to make sure is that at every level, we have the highest quality. Really, that's what people are going to, that's what's going to resonate with people, is that high quality, safety, and consistency of experience. Well, as you know, we're doing a little bit of white labeling now, but as we move on in the future, I think you're going to see us do less and less white labeling and more focus on our own brands. We do care about these other markets, but we kind of have we've got our hands full in Canada and California. And my own view is, let's get this right in California. If we get it right in California, guess what? It'll be a hop, skip, and jump to Florida, New York, and all these areas. So our focus really is on getting it working here properly. I mean, we get calls all the time. We just got offered a bunch of licenses in Greece, which sounded pretty good, but we went, we have to prove our model here in California before we go overseas or actually to any other states. And if we just did really well in California and Canada, this would be a humongous company, right? Other questions? Thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much.